going quarantine crazy and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is Garrick Ross. How's it going?
It's great.
Mr. New Jersey.
Yes.
And of course, Warren Miller. How's it going, Warren? Welcome back.
How are you, Mark?
And the podcast is called Going Quarantine Crazy and the Dumbest Bill in America. Of course, people are going crazy with the quarantine, call it the quarantine life, and they are going nuts. And I'm talking about people from all walks of life, politicians, reporters, you name it, right? Just the life itself, people getting on airplanes. We're going to talk about all this podcast. But first up, Nancy Pelosi says it's time to consider universal basic income. Of course, that was Andrew Yang's. The Yang Gang wanted to do UBI. Universal income, by the way. One of you guys define what UBI is.
So we get rid of every single social welfare program, and we just give everybody.
Well, in theory, we get rid of every single social welfare.
Will that actually be no?
I don't think progressives want to get rid of social welfare as we know it.
No, but as Yang proposed it, it was everybody gets $1,000 a month, just flatly on top of whatever income you make in life. The government just pays you $1,000.
Makes sense. I mean, but if you're Nancy Pelosi and Andrew Yang. But they're saying, of course, they're promising we're going to get rid of all social welfare programs, as you said, and in exchange, we're going to, give you like a flat amount of money per month?
Yes.
But no matter how much your income is?
No, if you're a single mother or a stay-at-home mother, or you're, a rich, welfare business owner, you're getting $1,000 a month. And what you do with that is up to you. It's supposed to give people flexibility and allow them to, explore options that they wouldn't have been able to financially.
And Andrew Yang came out of nowhere in the Democrat primary and actually was showing on the scoreboard, if you will.
Yeah.
Primary after primary, even though it was, towards the bottom, but he was at least showing up. And I mean, he wasn't really a politician, he was a businessman.
He did a lot in terms of changing the platform, which I think he should get some credit for, is a lot of his ideas weren't popular, or at least not thought about.
Changing the progressive platform, moving it forward, as they say. Move it forward.
Yeah, we're changing the direction.
What do you think about that, the UBI?
So they're trying to do this right now. The problem is most states' unemployment systems are broken. But right now, if you get your basic unemployment insurance, about $400 a week, and then you cap on the coronavirus stipend for $600, that's $1,000 a week through December.
Yes, that's
that's a disincentive for people to work.
Yes,
so you're never going to have an economic recovery.
Yeah.
And if they don't work, the federal government doesn't collect the money to be able to pay this out. So
that's right. So where's the money come from when you don't work? Where does anything come from?
I guess we'll print more.
Yeah, we'll print more money, but where do you get the products if people aren't working, right? We already have
supermarkets
a
are having problems
with
hiring
and getting meat and poultry,
yeah.
Of course, because of the quarantine. But Nancy Pelosi has adopted the UBI, the Universal Basic Income platform, if you will, and said, maybe it's time to consider it. We have a clip on this, and here is good old Nancy Pelosi.
What is operational and what needs other attention? Others have suggested a minimum income for a guaranteed income for people. Is that worthy of attention now? Perhaps so.
It looked like at one point her face froze up, though, because she's always trying to remember the next word because she really can't put a sentence together. And this isn't just me, picking on Nancy Pelosi. She really is way past her prime when it comes to actually remembering anything. But what do you guys think about whether or not the Democrats are going to push for this in the next stimulus bill? Warren?
I'm sure this will be one of a whole host of things. If she's talking about it now, she's setting the stage for them to push for this. And this will be part of the state bailout. They want half a trillion dollars, $500 billion. To go to these states. A lot of the states, California, Illinois, New York, have mismanaged their budgets, and they're looking for a huge bailout, not to pay for what they've spent on coronavirus, but to cover their pension liabilities and a lot of other dumb ideas that they've spent money on. And, I'm glad we do have a Republican Senate, Mitch McConnell, there to push back against this, because if you live in Kansas or Maryland or Indiana, what's your obligation to pay states like California and Illinois that have just wasted their money?
Absolutely. And also the rest of the taxpayers nationwide pay for the misbehavior and misspending of those blue states. So it's not like the burden is just on those blue states. After they get the funding from the federal government, the burden is on all taxpayers nationwide, which of course is what the blue states want, which is part of socialization, right? Part of socialism, I should say, is when you overspend, and then after you overspend, you say, well, no, I'm not going to file for bankruptcy. Instead, I'm going to put the burden of all of my overspending on everybody else. That's the definition of socialism, which is what they're actually trying to promote. And UBI is only going to make that better.
Yeah,
even worse.
I don't like that the UBI in its current form. I mean, we can basically call the CARES Act and the $600 a week extra on top of your unemployment. We can call that basically a form of UBI. I don't like that it was set out to December. I think that was looking way too far forward with a lot of facts that we weren't going to know. I think it would have made more sense to do it for a month and then have the Senate go back and re-up the program month after month until it wasn't necessary anymore. And I also think that we should have taken the SAS amendment more seriously. So there was a couple of senators who thought about the problem that Warren described, whereas this UBI has made it less incentive. It's less of an incentive for people to go back to work, and so people in critical industries are struggling to find a workforce. And what this bill would have done, or this amendment would have done, was made it so you couldn't make more money off staying home. And so, but they got laughed out of the room, unfortunately, and this is the reality we have to deal with.
Which is dangerous.
With our economic recoveries. We got to find a workforce to come back and turn the economy up again.
It's very dangerous, and incidentally, the Republicans, of course, obviously Congress is split. The House of Representatives is Democrat-controlled, and the United States Senate is Republican-controlled. So you do have to negotiate in order to get anything passed.
Yes.
And this was the negotiated settlement, if you will. But it does show you how we keep inching towards this whole idea of UBI, which is, hey, if I don't have to work and I can make actually more money than I'm currently making or the same amount, maybe this is the wave of the future without actually. The problem is in my opinion, most people, especially progressives, never think this through. Because as we just talked about, there are going to be shortages in everything. Mm-hmm. Of course there are. There already are. Go to the grocery store and try to buy paper towels. Still. Go try to buy toilet paper. Still. In fact, including certain other foodstuffs, like they're just not available. They're just not there, and they run out really quickly. Bottled water, if that's a thing that you want. Bottled water, it's very difficult to find. And that's because people aren't working, right?
I would be very careful what kind of programs we use and create as a result of coronavirus, and that we do, I would almost say, from an emotional perspective, where we're trying to react to this virus. Ronald Reagan has a famous quote, and it says, "The closest we'll ever get to eternal life is a government program." And so once these things happen, they don't go away. And we're going to be footing the bill for a long time. And it's,
that's why this next election is so important.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we can get through all these conspiracy theories as to, whether this was intentionally released. Of course, we're being told at the moment that this was not intentionally released, the coronavirus, by the Chinese, and that it was an accident. It came out of a laboratory, but initially we were told it wasn't out of the laboratory. It was out of the Wuhan, open, wet market. So little by little, we're getting more information. But the fact of the matter is, when you have an economy that is in a de facto, let's just say, semi-depression, it's really hard for a sitting president, to win, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's probably in part why a lot of the politicians are saying, well, let's pay off the American people to not work. One, because, they're being told they can't work, and another because we want them to vote for us in November. I mean, there is that. So talk about quarantine crazy, guys. Trump cuts U.S. research on the bat-human virus transmission. So let me say that again. Donald Trump cut the research funding for the human transmission virus studies from bats in China. So the Trump administration abruptly cut off that funding for a project studying how coronavirus spreads from bats to people after reports linked the work to a lab in Wuhan, China, at the center of the conspiracy theories about the COVID-19 pandemic's origins. And it was NIH and others who were helping to fund, apparently, this particular lab. We briefly talked about this before, but this is part of the quarantine crazy stuff, right? Because now you have a lot of time to sit in front of the TV and watch it and just absorb how stupid our government has become. Just incredibly stupid. It's too big, doing too many things. Thoughts on this?
I don't know why we're funding our enemy.
Well, there's the NIH and other parts of the American government are huge creators of grants, and they give money to study all kinds of things. The sexuality of frogs, all kinds of weird, bizarre things. We have no reason as American citizens to want to know. But for some reason, the NIH wants to know. So I think this was a little over $3 million that we, the American taxpayer, probably spent. And if you believe that this was created in the lab in Wuhan, we may have paid to create this virus. I mean, it's as simple as that. They got $3 million of American taxpayer money. This is, China's not exactly our friend.
No, they're not our friend.
They've been and engaged in economic warfare against us for years. They would love to take many of the surrounding countries and territories through military expansion, and they bristle every time we have, freedom of water exercises where we're near their shores. So it's not surprising they would, use the money in this way. And it's unfortunate that we were funding them and the World Health Organization to the levels we were.
You know what's interesting? The federal government is so massive, and there's so many departments and then sub-departments and sub-agencies that those departments and sub-departments and agencies send out RFPs for free federal money or for federal grants or for federal loans. And that money you can apply for. And what baffles me is, why are we allowing governments and institutions overseas to apply for this federal money? And that's what just blows me away. It's like this shouldn't be happening, but it shows you that who's watching NIH. Just as an example, you would think that there is some oversight agency that would be watching them, but these agencies get so big, Warren, they get so massive that how can any one person know how to rein in what they're actually doing? This is what, and by the way, being an elected official, which I don't talk about very often, and Warren's an elected official, it's something that I've learned. This is a learned thing. Yeah, outside of government, that's what I always thought anyway, was the government was so big. It wasn't until I got into government how I really learned how out of control and big it is, and it's doing way too many things that it shouldn't be doing. Just, can you follow up on that? Like any examples that you've seen?
Well, I'll point out a few things. Right now, we're very reliant on the Food and Drug Administration to approve a lot of things.
Takes forever.
Drugs for COVID treatment, test kits, the whole 9 yards. We want them to do that. There's an agency under the Department of Health and Human Services called the Agency for Health, Resource, and Quality, AHRQ. If you've ever been in a men's room, they do signs about sexually transmitted diseases. It's about the only thing I've ever seen them do that's beneficial. They have 4 times the budget of the Food and Drug Administration.
Oh my gosh.
So right now, we're hoping to get a rapid approval for vaccines and cures. We have a federal agency that's way overfunded. The Food and Drug Administration, for the most part, is probably underfunded. And you see things like that. NIH with its grants, like you said.
So the agency with the most funding is the one that has created signs that you put inside of bathrooms.
Right. And the NIH for a number of years under President Bush and a few of the other presidents, they've gotten like doubled funding every year. And most of that money goes out in the form of grants. And there's huge concerns about fraud because obviously if you're a researcher at NIH and you discover something, then you're allowed to go to market with it, but you discovered it with taxpayer money.
Ooh.
And there's a huge problem there. So there are a lot of things within the Department of Health and Human Services of the federal government where we're spending lots and lots of money. And like you said, when you begin to realize where the money's going, why it's going there, and what it's used for, and back to an earlier comment that Garrick made, there was a tax-created Spanish-American War on telephones. So if you still have a landline, this Grover Norcrest always brings this up, if you still have a landline, you pay this tax. Well, it was supposed to pay for the war. So that war has probably been paid for. It was supposed to pay for
the Spanish-American War.
Spanish-American War. That tax has probably been paid for that war 100 times over, and it's still being collected. Who knows what it's being used for?
Exactly. Certainly it's not dedicated for broadband across the United States because we still don't have it.
You mentioned who's supposed to police these organizations, and it's supposed to be Congress. I mean, Congress is the check and balance on the executive branch.
But Garrick, the problem is how can these elected officials do that if the agencies and their sub-agencies and their sub-departments are just so massive? I mean, I'm just asking you the question again that I asked Warren. I mean, how do you do that? Because you don't have that kind of time.
Yeah.
We're talking about a full-time.
But that's what I'm saying. Congress is almost reactionary. They don't get ahead of the game. They just react to issues that happen. I mean, one of the things trending right now on Netflix and Instagram and things like that on social media has been Waco, and where they're talking about policing the ATF.
Sure.
They didn't police the ATF and their tactics ahead of time when it was a big deal. They police it after. So like we're talking about NIH now, we were never ahead of the game. We were never looking to see where there was any problems or where something might come up. All they do is react and react. And it doesn't help that Congress typically can't get out of their own way anyway. I mean, there's a reason they enjoy a 12% approval rating with the American people. They don't do much.
Well, there's two things. I mean, and the one thing's been broken for years, we know, because they haven't come up with these budgets annually. They do.
No, they do the continuing
CRs.
resolutions.
But Congress, through the appropriations process, is supposed to review the president's budget.
Yeah.
And Congress owns part of this problem because they always want to put money in certain pockets of whatever they favor.
Yes.
The second part of this is every cabinet agency has an inspector general. And they're supposed to be the ones looking at fraud, waste, and abuse.
That's having the team police themselves almost, though, don't you think?
Well, the inspector general is supposed to be independent of the agency they're overseeing. I mean, they don't report to the secretary, they report to the president. They produce their own reports and things. But it seems to me that they don't really have the teeth they need to go after this wasteful spending or highlighting this wasteful spending.
Right.
Or else the people they're putting in these roles just aren't doing their jobs.
Interesting.
The government is not a good steward of the tax-paying dollars. I think something that everybody should really take out.
No, it's not. But the thing is the American, look, Donald Trump ran several years ago saying, drain the swamp. And the message there was that government was too big, it was too out of touch with the American people, and it wasn't really representing them. And literally, we're seeing in the middle of a pandemic how true that is.
Yeah.
Because government hasn't been as responsive as it should be because we're making stuff in other places that aren't interested in helping us because they're going to help themselves first. And there's so many other issues that have come forth, like you said, Warren, with the FDA. I mean, it's just really an interesting example. So next up, couple funny things, but first up, Biden says Trump has millions of dollars with the Bank of China. Obviously, this is going to be a big issue in this election. You know, Biden is in bed with the Chinese government, and so has his son. And President Trump, of course, has been fighting China, including during the election itself, the general election. But I guess Biden is starting to feel the heat because of a number of other things, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But here is Joe Biden and the latest clip of him as he's being quarantined. Here it is.
Do you think that this is going to, in fact, be a major issue? And are you vulnerable on this issue at all because of your son's business dealings in China?
No, I don't believe so at all. My son's business dealings were not anything with everybody that he's talking about, not even remotely, number one. Nothing to do with me, number two. And to talk about business dealings, look at the business dealings the president has with China. He owes apparently millions of dollars to the Bank of China.
So there you go. Quarantine crazy Joe Biden. I'm sure he's going crazier than he already was.
Quarantine crazy, Joe. I think Joe's just crazy.
He's just crazy. But he literally, Warren, Joe Biden just made the assertion that Donald Trump is banking with China. What? I mean, that would be all over CNN and MSNBC if that were even remotely true.
You can't answer crazy.
Exactly.
I don't know what to say to that. It's like he just goes out on, what was that, MSNBC, and just throws out these unsubstantiated claims with zero validity.
What shows you, for him to say that, it shows you that they're polling and they're probably seeing that that's going to hurt him.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to figure out, how do we get out ahead of this to say, no, it's not you, it's not me, it's actually Donald Trump. He's the one that's banking with China. Deflection. Even though, of course, no one said that Joe's banking with China. They're saying that he's in bed with them and basically doing their work for them. And so that wasn't enough with Joe Biden. The funniest clip of the day, although there are other funny ones too, trust me, about going crazy in the quarantine life, is Joe Biden. He calls for, well, most of us would say economic discourse throughout the world, or economic trade, or I don't know, what else would we call it?
Anything.
International affairs, diplomacy. No, Joe Biden called it economic intercourse. Yes, he called it economic intercourse, and you heard that correctly. And here is the clip.
I would get much more engaged in the world. We can't step back. If, in fact, for example, we solve the problem in the United States of America and you don't solve it in other parts of the world, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have travel bans. You're going to not be able to have economic intercourse around the world. There's a lot. Look, when America goes alone, when America is first, it's America alone.
Joe is going crazy. Quarantine.
Apparently China's screwing us more ways than one.
I'm sorry, but if you were interviewing Joe and he says economic intercourse,
I'd be laughing.
what do you say?
I would break out hysterically.
Well, Mr. Vice President, does that include social distancing and the intercourse part of it?
So two examples of what Joe's talking about. Recently, China has purchased Smithfield Foods.
Yes.
So one of our big meat processing and packaging companies are now going to be owned by China.
And they're going to ship the product over to China where they're going to slaughter it and then package it and send it back.
That's an example. Well, I think they're already doing that, even without Smithfield. I think there's already arrangements where meat growers are already sending stuff to be processed in China.
Ugh.
And who knows what comes back? I mean, is
who
it what
knows?
we sent? I
Yeah.
have no idea. So that's one example of us being, our taxpayers and our citizens being on the wrong side of economic intercourse.
China's screwing us.
And the second example, I just was reading, I think yesterday, that China is buying a large group of oil wells in Texas for a rather vast sum of money.
Oh, God.
So once again, China is using economic intercourse
Yes.
to take advantage of
And they're
American
inserting
possessions.
themselves inside of America.
Yes. Yes. And these things scare me, and I'm certainly hopeful that at some level the federal government has to review these purchases by China, and they have to step in
Absolutely.
and stop this intercourse.
Absolutely. I mean,
China's been conducting economic intercourse all over the world, though. I mean, this is part of a larger policy called the Belt Road Initiative.
Absolutely.
Where China basically goes and they find, developing countries and
that's where they're trying to have intercourse with the rest of the world with that
Yeah.
Belt and Road Initiative.
Belt and Road, and, yeah.
You know
unbuckle
what I
the
found
belt.
interesting too is here's what I think happened in that interview when Joe said economic intercourse. I'm convinced that 5 minutes before the interview, he had a session with his advisors about all the allegations that he had raped this woman,
And
he
it
kept
was on
thinking
the mind.
intercourse. So he was thinking intercourse.
It was on the mind.
And so then he got on to, the news program and he said economic intercourse because that's what he was thinking about. So, by the way, just remember
Garbage in,
President,
garbage out.
remember if you're President Xi Jinping, the president of China,
Winnie the Pooh.
and you're Winnie the Pooh and you're negotiating with Joe Biden because he wins president of the United States, God forbid. And the interpreter, the Chinese interpreter is like, yes, Mr. President, he said economic intercourse. And she's like, ha, 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 ha. I can run circles around this guy. I'm sorry. Did we get that one? Did we bang that one to death?
Do you want to? Oh, God, Mark.
So next up, Olivia Nuzzi of New York Magazine asks Donald Trump, do you deserve re-election since so many people died in Vietnam, but more have died in this pandemic in the United States? So, Mr. President, do you deserve to be reelected, given that comparison? This is Olivia Nuzzi of New York Magazine asking the question. A normal Donald Trump, and honestly, a normal president of the United States would not even take this question seriously, which we'll talk about after you hear the clip. The normal president of the United States would actually really attack this reporter as what should have happened. The president kept us cool. I can't believe that he did. It's unusual for him, quite frankly. We have a clip on this, and we're going to talk about it afterwards. And here is the clip.
If an American president loses more Americans over the course of 6 weeks than died in the entirety of the Vietnam War, does he deserve to be reelected?
So, yeah, we've lost a lot of people, but if you look at what original projections were, 2.2 million, we're probably heading to 60,000, 70,000. It's far too many. One person is too many for this. And I think we've made a lot of really good decisions. The big decision was closing the border or doing the ban. People coming in from China, obviously, other than American citizens, which had to come in. Can't say you can't come in, you can't come back to your country. I think we've made a lot of good decisions. I think that Mike Pence and the task force have done a fantastic job. I think that everybody working on the ventilators, you see what we've done there, have done unbelievable. The press doesn't talk about ventilators anymore. They just don't want to talk about them, and that's okay. But the reason they don't want to talk, that was a subject that nobody would get off of. They don't want to talk about them. We're in the same position on testing. We are lapping the world on testing, and the world is coming to us. As I said, they're coming to us saying, what are you doing? How do you do it? And we're helping them. So, no, I think we've done a great job. And one person, I will say this, one person is too many.
So there you go, Warren, a smug New York Magazine reporter asking the President of the United States and it shows you how incredibly fake and dishonest our reporting is in the United States of America in the 21st century. Ask the President of the United States, do you think you deserve re-election as President of the United States since more people have died in this pandemic than in Vietnam? Please comment.
So I can only imagine a world in which Hillary Clinton is our president right now instead of Donald Trump.
Go over to her Twitter. She thinks she is still.
We had allowed thousands and they said there were 2.5 million Chinese that traveled out of China at the peak of the virus in China. Imagine how much worse this country would be with Hillary. We'd be doing the H1N1 thing where this wasn't a pandemic. We wouldn't have shutdowns. We wouldn't have a president that cared. And you wouldn't have a media asking her about the $2.5 million deaths. Mm-hmm. That would be, inconsequential to Hillary and her presidency. So for this media to be this far removed from reality,
they really are.
I think people see that the president cares. He's trying to do his best. Some people get annoyed with his delivery or style, but you can't be annoyed with the way he handled that reporter's question.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was very surprised by that.
What's shocking?
Because usually Trump, when he gets a question, like a gotcha question like that, he just goes, that's a nasty question, you're fake news, and they exchange barbs for 2 minutes, and then he moves on with his life. I was actually pleasantly surprised that he was like, yeah, I do deserve to be reelected. Like, we've handled this very well, and like, we can scrutinize the merits of what he said, but the fact that he gave that kind of an eloquent response in the face of that kind of a nasty question, it was very well done.
So don't you think Olivia Nuzzi of New York Magazine, who asked that question, wouldn't it be more appropriate for her to spend her time in New York City, in Manhattan, and ask Governor Cuomo,
does he deserve to be
and
reelected?
Bill de Blasio, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Governor, what do you think you deserve re-election, given the fact that you instructed, in fact, signed an executive order requiring nursing homes to accept coronavirus patients in the nursing home during recovery, because they were too sick to go home, but also too well to stay in the hospital. So instead of sending them to the U.S. Comfort or to one of the makeshift National Guard hospitals, instead you sent them to, nursing homes, which ended up killing, and I consider this to be murder, by the way, literally murdering, I think, almost 3,000 people.
Half of the New York City deaths were at nursing homes.
So, but no, she doesn't ask him that. And here's another thing, too. Olivia Nuzzi of New York Magazine, why don't you ask, President Xi Jinping of China, do you deserve re-election after murdering, how many people in China and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people worldwide?
Around the planet.
Oh, that's right. Mr. President Xi Jinping of China, you don't have to run for re-election.
And he doesn't have a free press. There's never going to be a reporter to ask him that question.
Isn't that incredible?
She'd be shot in Tiananmen Square.
Exactly. Or run over with a tank,
Jeez.
So you guys, look, the Atlantic Magazine, we have to talk about this because oftentimes on Mark the Millennials, we talk about free speech. The Atlantic Magazine, obviously, certainly left-leaning, there's an article entitled, Internet Speech Will Never Go Back to Normal by Jack Goldsmith, a Harvard law professor, and Andrew Keen Woods, a professor of law at the University of Arizona College of Law. If you out in podcast land get a chance, read this Atlantic story. Obviously it's not really a story, it's an op-ed, it's an opinion piece. Internet speech will never go back to normal is what it's called. It's worth reading, not because I agree with it. I actually think there's some interesting history in this article because it's a really long article. It's like reading half of a book. But the problem is their conclusion shows you, in my opinion, how the intellectual elites in America's universities are so out of touch with what's really going on in our society, and they're not listening to the average American, the hardworking men and women of this country. Here's what listen to this. Here's what their conclusion is. It's really, they say, in the great debate of the past 2 decades about freedom versus control of the network, the internet, China was largely right, and the United States was largely wrong. Significant monitoring and speech control are inevitable components of a mature and flourishing internet, and governments must play a large role in these practices to ensure that the internet is compatible with a society's norms and values.
Can I get some background on the individual and why I think he has a lot of the beliefs that he does?
The individual who wrote this, you mean?
The Harvard professor.
So do you mean Jack Goldsmith?
Yeah.
Okay.
So from my understanding, Jack Goldsmith was the head of the Bush administration's Office of Legal Counsel in the wake of 9/11 and much of the administration.
That's correct, yes.
And so he would have overseen a lot of people who you might view as a household name, like John Yoo, and several of these individuals who basically are the architect of the surveillance state that we all experience today. And what it breeds in part of this globalist, security apparatus that we've come to know and love over the better part of the last 15 years is that government essentially is the arbiter of security, and where I think he's getting at is trying to put that system that he was the architect of during the Bush administration, the Bush years, where we've gone from, basically free and open society to a lot of, surveillance, intelligence gathering, data mining, with the National Security Association, the NSA's scandal from about the Obama years, and applying that to the internet. And I think that is what his whole point is. So for a lot of people for the Patriot Act, it's basically applying the Patriot Act and similar surveillance programs like that to the internet and having this kind of overarching police force of the internet done by the U.S. government, which he's essentially saying is that China does that now and they do it right, and that we should do it too.
That we should do it the way China is doing it.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the conclusion. His conclusion wasn't in the last paragraph, by the way. It's like right in the center. Interesting. The whole thesis of what he was writing was right in the center of the article. And it was a very long article. Must be dozens of paragraphs. And you read it and you look at this and you're like, how can such a learned individual actually think that we should in any way emulate China? Warren.
So let me get this straight. This is a guy that thrives on the First Amendment.
Right.
So he can write his articles,
Yes.
but he thinks the First Amendment should be infringed.
Yes. Certainly online.
How does that work? I mean, how can you be somebody that writes an opinion and want other people to read? What happens when he runs afoul of his very own censors?
Exactly.
The stupidity there is just...
But he'll say, because he also said in the article an interesting comment, which is that, Facebook and others rely on fact-checking based on what they consider to be legitimate sources. So if you're a professor, you can just say, well, I'm a professor of law at Harvard, right, so obviously what I say is legitimate. Mm-hmm. But you know what, Garrick, you're a millennial, and as such, you're young.
Yeah.
And what you write is not legitimate because you're really not credentialed.
No, because I haven't been there yet, or I'm not part of the good old boys club. But I think he operates this whole thesis under a false presumption, and he's basically saying that it is inevitable that the internet will be policed or overseen by the government and regulated to this high degree, and that is where I think he's incorrect. So I don't think the argument is
it's not inevitable, and also it's not right.
And it's not right. And I think that's the problem. Is he's basically saying that it's going to happen, but I think he misunderstands that a lot of people don't want it to happen. Most people don't want the government in their lives.
But he doesn't address that at all in his article.
He doesn't address it all. But that's why I'm saying I think the whole thesis is flawed in that that is the central premise that he operates under, which I think is incorrect. It is not inevitable, and it is not what degree of regulation do we want. It is, are we going to be regulated or are we not going to be regulated?
And as Warren said, these two gentlemen have the right to put pen to paper and say whatever they want, and that's great. And of course, we also have the right to criticize them. But literally, if this guy had his way, and he were to write something similar let's just say in Chinese society, but it also had a slant where it criticized the Chinese, Communist Party or the dictator in China, Xi Jinping, then you probably would be kicked out of the country. You'd be silenced. You'd be sent to a Uyghur concentration camp or something like that. I'm amazed that this is what the progressives that control our universities think. And I agree with you. I mean, he was in the Bush administration. I read that. I thought it was fascinating, but I can't imagine how a learned person would come to this conclusion, that China has it right and the U.S. has it wrong.
Oh, well, when you're the architect of the Patriot Act and similar, surveillance programs like that, I can easily see the transition to how he thinks that something like this should be regulated to the nth degree like it is.
So this podcast is called Going Quarantine Crazy. And speaking of which, if you're quarantined, you're home, obviously by definition, a lot, and you're going crazy. And so an ABC News reporter is talking about, he's at home, obviously, as all the reporters are, And he's at home and he's talking about drone service for pharmacies. You know, you order something online and the pharmacy puts it on a drone and the drone delivers it to you. And talking about how various pharmacies are experimenting with this. And so the thing is, the ABC News reporter has a camera on him in his house, and he's wearing a jacket, and he looks, and his hair is combed. He looks very, you know, proper and coiffed and put together, except that the cameraman, I presume, who was there, I'm not sure who it was, but they panned out a little bit, or the subtitle at the bottom of the screen kind of went away because it was talking about what he was, you know, it's talking about the gentleman was talking about. Anyway, long story short, he was obviously wearing his underwear or shorts or what have you. It's just kind of funny. More of craziness of being quarantined. We have a clip on this, and here it is.
CVS and UPS say initially the final leg of prescriptions journeys will be done by ground carriers, so people won't be getting their medication dropped out of the sky into their mailbox just yet. But the companies do say they will scale up the program if it is successful, guys.
Very cool. We love it, Will. Thank you.
So there you have it. So just as she says very and then cool, that's when is it the Chiron that comes off at the bottom? And is it Chiron? How do you say that word?
Chiron?
Yeah,
I think you're right.
I'd rely on graphic.
Yeah, the graphic comes off, and then it's like, whoa, the dude's wearing his underwear. You know, I mean, and he's wearing a jacket. Actually, you know, quarantine crazy. I mean, I can't say I blame him, but it just shows you, I think half of America, at least the half of America that's still working, and which, by the way, I'm glad you're still working, and I feel terrible for the half that is not. At least the half of America that's still working, I have no doubt they're probably working in their underwear.
Oh, I was going to say, at least he was wearing a suit upper. I think most people were just throwing on sweatpants or even that and walking over to the desk.
So get this, Going Quarantine Crazy, the podcast. So WSJ, Wall Street Journal, has an article, Welcome to Your Flight, Nathan. And this is a great article. Let me tell you why, because it's an article of the sign of the times, because there's a gentleman, his name is Nathan Grimaldo, and he was at the Phoenix airport. He was trying to get home to El Paso. And so he walks up to the gate, and the lady goes, "Oh, hi, Mr. Grimaldo. Welcome to your flight." And he's like, "Well, since when? How do you know my name? I didn't even give you my ticket yet." And she's like, "Oh, well, you're the only person on the flight." So he gets on the plane, and they have a picture of him. It's the funniest thing. It's a picture of him. He's sitting in first class with a big smile on his face because it's like he's not flying first class, but they upgraded him. Right, upgraded. And he's sitting in first class, and the entire plane is empty. And it's just him going back home to El Paso from Phoenix.
It's kind of cool.
Talk about the sign of the times.
Talk about luxury right there. I mean, I had something similar that happened to me. I wasn't the only person, but it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and our flight got delayed, and I wound up flying at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was me and like 4 other people on this flight. And it's funny how they do it. They're like, you got to sit here, and then you got to sit back there because you got to space out the plane. And they're like, well, we got to bring in weight, so they throw in all this like extra stuff into the undercarriage. But man, could you imagine being the only person? Think about the economics of that. Whatever airline he flew operated at the worst loss you could ever imagine. Physically, all the price of flying, air traffic controllers, jet fuel, the whole nine, just for one person.
But imagine if you are in the airline business, you have to keep flights going, even if it's at a minimum, the minimum number of flights. And so, because you have to start somewhere to be able to get people to feel safe so they can come back to the airport and start flying. And this guy probably assumed, okay, well, they've cut back flights so much that I'm going to be in a plane that's going to be full because they probably only have one flight every 3 days or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead, he gets on it, and he's the only one there, and he sits in first class.
He doesn't have to worry about social distancing, though. He's all taken care of.
His worst fear is, maybe, by the way, I guess they had a flight attendant, right? I mean, she probably was totally, what can I get you?
Yeah.
Free beer, free cocktail, would you like?
I'm sure they were trying to upsell him. Got to milk every penny out of him that they can.
That's right. I just don't want Joe Biden to go on one of those flights and talk about economic intercourse. So.
Back to that again.
So, I'm sorry. But that is a sign of the crazy quarantine times. Another one, of course, is a New Jersey high school teacher. She's a math teacher.
Are we going to do this
And
again?
she's in Jersey,
Oh,
your home
God.
state, your
Yes.
crazy state of New Jersey.
You going to ask me what exit I'm from now?
There are a bunch of kids, well, in a minute, there are a bunch of kids who are in a park in New Jersey, and all they're doing, they're just hanging out and playing. Obviously, they're trying to get fresh air.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, we're told by the experts now, that's a good thing.
Yes.
When it's sunny out especially, but even when it's not, fresh air is good. So they're outside, these kids are, and they sound like they're teenagers, perhaps older teenagers. And a math teacher, a high school math teacher comes by. She looks like she recognizes them.
You already got to be crazy to teach math, but continue.
And she basically says to them, you cannot be here in this park. You can't be here. You cannot be outside. And then basically says something incredible, which is, you are going to die a long and painful death, and I hope that you do, from coronavirus, as a result of not being quarantined, because you're not following, Heil Hitler. We have a clip on this. We're going to talk about this too. And here is the clip.
Am I screaming loud enough that you can hear me over your music? Park closed. You will get arrested if the cops come.
Wait, can we go over there?
Is that crazy enough for you?
Can we go over there?
Park closed. The whole area.
The whole.
Get it through your thick head.
The whole.
You are the reason we are in this situation. You are the problem, not the solution. Go ahead, keep recording. Who are you going to show it to? Post me on social media. You're the idiot doing the wrong thing. I'm just trying to save your ass and save your life. But die, okay? I hope both of you get the coronavirus. I hope you both die a long, painful death.
Cool.
Can you believe that? And the guy goes at the end, the teenager.
Cool. That is such a teenage thing. I would not have reacted any differently. I'd have said, all right, cool, thanks.
You know what's funny is Garrick. So podcast listeners, as you know, Garrick is from New Jersey. What exit?
82. Here we are
82.
again.
Exit 82.
Every time.
And the thing is they have attitude. People from New Jersey have attitude. So I'm sure they're so used to getting yelled at, because I think it's a New York, northern New Jersey
We
thing
just
anyway.
talk to each other by yelling at each
Yes,
other.
just to have just to communicate, you yell. And so they're like used. It's almost like their mother's yelling at them, like, okay, yeah, right, cool.
You all may think that teacher was going crazy. That's pretty standard for us.
That's normal New Jersey talk.
I hope you die. Yeah, I mean, I've heard it a few times. It's, you can't drive 5 miles down the road without somebody flipping you off. It's just the law of the language. It's the lay of the land out there. It's just the language.
Warren, aren't people going quarantine crazy? I mean, seriously.
She's begging to be famous. She was confronting the kids and saying, go ahead, record me. What are you going to do, put me on the internet? Well, obviously she made it.
That's the worst thing you can say to a teenager. Oh, yeah? I dare you to record me.
Yeah.
I don't care if you
Okay.
record me. And they're like,
All right.
cool.
5 minutes of fame. Yeah, cool.
That was up. That was up in like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
It was up on Twitter in 2
My
seconds.
question, what was she doing? So these boys are playing in the park.
Yeah.
What was she doing?
So,
Why was she
obviously as a
around?
teacher, she's not in school. I mean, she's home, maybe doing telelearning, maybe not. But who made her an employee of the parks or the local police force to be enforced? I mean, where do people get this idea that suddenly they have these special powers?
Narcs.
If they yell loud enough, people get in trouble.
Oh, God.
Narcs for quarantine. Quarantine narcs.
In Baltimore City, snitches get stitches. So
know,
I don't know what goes in New Jersey, but
I was going to say, we operate under the presumption of mind your damn business. And
Right.
that lady
Yes.
was not minding her damn business.
Agreed. Yeah, and she was just in their face. I mean, she was a good, 15 yards away, but just kind of like in your face, like, I'm going to come after you. And there was a fence separating them, a chain link fence. But
And first of all, those kids aren't going to die. The mortality rate for children under
30,
under
there
30,
are no mortality. There's been no mortality in Maryland under 30.
that's incredible.
it's like
And they want to scare everybody. They want to say that, but-
nationally, the death rates for like people under 30 is 0.0001.
Yeah.
It is so minuscule. There's probably no chance. Most people who have it under 30 won't even know that they had it.
But by the way, the best thing you guys said about that clip, about this math teacher saying, I hope you die from coronavirus, a long and painful death, is that it's like, what is she doing outside? She's apparently not worried about it, or did she just make it a point to come out of her house and dart to the park?
She probably had a lot of pent up frustration she was trying to get out.
So
Cool.
So get this, guys. I mean, this is the ultimate and the world going crazy, okay, with quarantine, because the Pentagon decided to release UFO footage. By the way, this UFO footage has been released for a while. The difference is now it was released by, I presume, pilots or others, or maybe there was a soft release. not really sure how I'm not sure how the Pentagon does this when it comes to UFOs. But the Pentagon finally released footage of an unidentified flying object. They don't know what it is. And by the way, the Pentagon said, we acknowledge we don't know what this is. We've tried. And so we're going to just release it out there during a pandemic so you can talk about it.
Before we play the clip, can I get both of your thoughts as boomers on what you think about extraterrestrials?
By the way, we don't have a clip on this because it's all over the internet if you want to see it. And we didn't want to do a clip because it's very loud and it's hard to see. It's just the pilot saying, what's that? I don't know what that is.
Freaking out and screaming.
And they're going, one of the pilots says, it's spinning. And then another pilot goes, whoa, because the thing like really moved quickly right across the ocean. And for a pilot to say that, it means it was moving at a speed that was
absurd.
Unimaginable,
yeah.
And not probably humanly possible, maybe. I don't know. And it's also difficult to tell from the picture how big the actual item is that's flying. But go ahead, Mr. Millennial.
So you guys are boomers and you presumably grew up during a very imaginable time with things. What do you guys think about extraterrestrials?
Go ahead, Warren.
So why is it only possible that life would be here on this planet?
I am a full-fledged, we're not alone in this universe.
My hope is if they are actually aliens that we're seeing, is they bring us a cure for coronavirus.
Heck yeah, man.
Absolutely.
Look out for
that would be my hope.
And I hope they don't bring it to Xi Jinping. I'm just saying.
Mark, extraterrestrials?
Oh, extraterrestrials. A question from the Millennial is, what do I think about extraterrestrials? So I was a Trekkie growing up.
Oh, okay.
So I was a Star Trek. By Trekkie, I'm talking about the early Trekkies with what's his face?
William Shatner.
William Shatner, yeah. Who's
Leonard Nimoy.
It's hard to believe Shatner is at least still alive. So I was a Trekkie. I was that guy. I was that kid. And I always remember I was in a math class, and it was elementary school, and they started introducing the idea of infinity. And so we would ask questions. Never forget this. It's like, you'd ask the question to the math teacher, can you explain that a little better? What does that mean? It's like, well, no, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And so you think about that and you said to yourself, just logically, if the universe is infinite, which it probably is, how could it not be? Then there must be an infinite number of everything.
Infinite possibilities, yeah.
An infinite possibilities. So clearly, if it's infinite, and you believe that, which I do, then there must be a lot of other life forms across the universe. And I agree with Warren. I hope that one day that we are able to interact with these other life forms and that we can make life better for all of us as a result of it. I mean that sincerely.
So society progresses and we're able to do,
And that comes from Trekkiness, because if you're a guy that's about and of course later on when Star Wars came, oh my gosh, I couldn't wait to get in the movie theater to watch Star Wars. Could not wait. And my brother Robert, by the way, who's a pilot, lifelong pilot, first a fighter pilot and now a pilot for Federal Express. He and I were the two Trekkies of the family and the two Star Wars guys of the family. No one else cared about it. And so I felt kind of nerdy about that. But then now when I see this stuff that the Pentagon is releasing, it does make you wonder if maybe our government's trying to ease us into the possibilities that maybe they've known something for a long time and now they're trying to let us know. What do you guys think before we move on?
I think it's probably impossible that we don't ever get to a point where we interact with something. I mean, think about how much...
What do you mean? I don't know. What does that mean?
Like, I think with the exponential growth of civilization and, space being the final frontier, and I think... Well, it'll happen eventually. I think whether or not, it's us or it isn't us and we're alive or not alive, I think hopefully, mankind gets to a point where we can explore the cosmos and go around and do
explore other
interplanetary
worlds.
And see what's out there. I mean,
sure.
One of my personal things that the government bothers me is that we stopped doing those kinds of exploratory things. We don't go to the moon anymore. We don't do American aeronautics and things like that anymore. We outsource it to China and Russia and things like that. It's one of those things that I wish the United States would put more of an emphasis on, because while people view it as sunk dollars because you don't get a return on investment per se, the technological leaps and bounds that we made as a result of the space
But we have made enormous technological advances in listening devices here on our planet, where we're listening all the time, 24/7.
Yeah.
And clearly, there are things I would imagine if you happen to work at very high levels in government in those departments
that you know that we don't.
That they know, that they've heard. I'm not talking about actual conversations, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But perhaps things that can't be identified.
Yeah, like the WOW signal in the 80s and things like that, yeah.
So go ahead, Warren.
So, I mean, growing up, you had Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, that's a good one.
The Philadelphia Experiment.
That's right.
Area 51.
That's right.
All these unanswered things. And throughout all that stuff, now probably not for Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, but through the Bermuda Triangle and all these other things, there were, and supposed UFO sightings, there were always governments saying, no, this isn't real, this didn't happen. So to get to a point now where they're actually admitting and releasing footage and saying,
we don't know what it is.
We don't know what this is. That's a big leap forward, because for years and years and years, there have been nothing but denials.
Yes, because normally the Pentagon, that's a great point, Warren. Normally the Pentagon would have said, we're releasing this because it has been debunked. But now they're saying, we're releasing this, we're not debunking it, but we're not verifying it either. We're just saying, this is what they saw, the footage is what they saw, and we know nothing else.
Yep.
Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So, next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. And it's the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Assistant Producer? Of course. Here it is. Dum 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 dum. And yes, the dumbest bill in America is, ready? You ready for it? Waiting for it? Stimulus money for Harvard. Yes, the stimulus money for Harvard, because we all know how badly Harvard must need stimulus money because, it's Harvard. That is got to be the dumbest idea and the dumbest bill without question in America, because it was funding that was snuck into the stimulus bill, which was $2.2 trillion. This is the initial stimulus bill as a result of the pandemic. And the $2.2 trillion stimulus CARES Act allowed Harvard to apply and receive money, even though Harvard has a $40 billion endowment. Warren.
There are lots of colleges and universities. I mean, we hear in Maryland all about the historically black colleges and universities all the time that are disadvantaged, don't have billion-dollar endowments, that probably could use some of this money to help their students and to help their schools.
Absolutely.
And when you see the pig that Harvard is, wallowing in, this is not unlike the other CARES Act stuff where we've seen big chains take money and what did I just see? The Lakers?
Yes.
Got money, which wouldn't sustain them. It wouldn't begin to cover part of their payroll. This is another example of why government is a horrible steward over tax dollars.
It really is. What do you think about this?
Who would ever think to do this?
Well, I go to a school with an endowment that is only $70 million, so I think Harvard should take a quick look in the mirror and say, do I really need that with $40 billion in my endowment?
So we have a couple of clips on this, right? We're gonna have plenty of time to talk about this. So the dumbest bill in America is stimulus money for Harvard. By the way, it's not stimulus money, it's taxpayer money. Taxpayer money for Harvard, because Harvard has been aggrieved during this pandemic. Yeah, right, with a $40 billion endowment.
Everybody still paid tuition.
Yeah, so get this. So Donald Trump's asked about, the stimulus money of the PPP program, which is the payroll protection program. And to be clear, the payroll protection program is different from the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. So the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund allowed universities to apply and receive money to make sure that they had a going concern. Whereas the PPP money was for businesses to make sure they were a going concern. Now, to be fair, Trump has kind of lumped it all together in his response. But what we've heard is, and here's what you guys appreciate. Look, what we've heard is the media keeps hitting Trump on, well, what about Shake Shack? What about the LA Lakers? What about Ruth's Chris Steakhouse? All these big companies that have gotten money. And of course, as they have been identified, Steve Mnuchin and others are saying, we're going to make sure that these companies are audited. Most of them have returned the money anyway, including Shake Shack and the LA Lakers, right? I don't know about Ruth's Chris, by the way. But nonetheless, the real issue here is Trump turns it around on them and says, well, what about Harvard? And so we have a clip on this, and here it is.
That money. I wanted to follow up on, you said about the small business program, Harvard's going to pay the money back. How confident are you that you can claw back money from places like Harvard?
Well, I'm going to have to look. I don't like when Harvard that has, I think, a $40 billion endowment or some incredible amount of money that Harvard gets this money. Harvard should pay that money back. I want Harvard to pay the money back, okay? And if they won't do that, then we won't do something else. They have to pay it back. I don't like it. I don't like it. This is meant for workers. This isn't meant for one of the richest institutions, not only far beyond schools, in the world. They got to pay it back. I want them to pay it back.
Warren, respond to that. What do you think?
I love it. They should pay it back.
Absolutely.
And if they don't want to pay it back, maybe it's time Harvard became a public institution, not the private institution that it is.
Guess what they get a lot of?
Oh, the government subsidy anyway.
Grant dollars.
Grant dollars,
Oh
yes.
my gosh, yes. So
It's probably in the billions.
absolutely, so many grant dollars.
Yeah, because
So-
they do a lot of research.
And
with
so that was a thinly veiled threat
For
from Trump.
the little bit of money they might have gotten out of this program, to lose their grant funding would be calamitous for this,
Oh
this
my gosh,
institution.
yes. So get this. So CBS News Boston has a reporter talking about Harvard's response to all the criticism they received for getting this money. And by the way, the amount of money is almost $9 million. And so CBS News Boston we have a little clip from them because they're talking about it. They're doing a little bit, trying to explain it away and trying to put a good spin on this for Harvard because naturally, the hometown news station. We have a clip on this, and here it is.
During the coronavirus crisis. They say the money they received was part of the CARES Act Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. They tweeted in part, Harvard has committed that 100% of these emergency funds will be used to provide direct assistance to students facing urgent financial needs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The university added that this money will be on top of the support they have already provided to students, including with travel, living expenses for those who need it, and help transitioning to the online learning.
Yes. So that's CBS Boston saying, yeah, but Harvard needed the money because it's really to transition to online learning for the students and for the students, that go to Harvard that can't afford to go there. Guys, that's what your endowment is for.
Yes.
The purpose of your endowment is to throw off money from your investments so that you can help the people that can't otherwise afford to pay for Harvard.
And it's not like we're talking about 30,000 people at a state school. Harvard's total enrollment is like 6,000 kids.
Yeah, so go ahead, Warren.
I got to believe none of the kids are on campus right now.
They're not on campus, but they're saying, maybe they don't have access to the internet and maybe they need a laptop. Can you believe that? Can you believe that that's even a reliable kind of reporting about Harvard? It's a bunch of crap. I'm sorry, it really is. And the other thing, too, I find interesting is that, if you have a $40 billion endowment and you just get a 5% return, what does that come to?
I think more math than
I think
can
that's
do.
a couple of $1 billion. So if you're throwing off a couple of $1 billion a year from your investments, don't you think that would help pay substantially, if not completely, for all of those students who can't afford to go to Harvard and then some? But no, Harvard had the guts to apply for this, and they're saying, well, no, we didn't actually apply for it. It just came to us, which is nonsense. You had to apply for it. It's a big lie. So final thoughts on this, Warren, and then Garrick, about this dumbest bill in America, stimulus for Harvard.
Well, I sure hope the auditing is done well. And, this reliance on continued stimulus. I mean, we're into the trillions of dollars now.
Yes, we are.
The impact on our children and grandchildren is going to be severe. I mean, that's indebtedness that we've put ourselves in. And to think that the taxpayers have signed up for this huge burden, in some cases, I think there's a very real need for the unemployment insurance where they're employees of non-essential businesses.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're an employee of an essential business and you've signed up for UI, that's reprehensible. You should be
Because you're still working.
You should be working.
You're still working.
Well, no, you can't sign up if you're still working. But my
Right.
point
You
is,
voluntarily
if you've left your
leave
job
and then,
and you're collecting that, you're not willing to go back to work, you want to live off of this.
Got it.
That's bad. Same thing for a lot of these companies. If you're a company facing bankruptcy, you're non-essential, the world's over, you deserve some help.
Absolutely.
But if you're a company that's got fat revenues right now and you're doing well and you're essential and you're applying for this stuff,
it's disgusting.
It's reprehensible.
Absolutely
and
disgusting.
It needs to be audited, and the bad actors need to be gone after. And unfortunately, this is greed.
And Mnuchin said that anyone that receives $2 million or more will automatically be audited,
Yep.
and others will be audited too as they're identified. But certainly $2 million or more, I mean, in the overall scheme of things, that's a relatively low number for auditing. And so that's a good thing. That's a really positive check and balance.
We're still hearing stories about stimulus money and how it was spent. Remember
Absolutely.
Stimulus money under Obama was
from
gonna,
Obama, yes.
Yeah. And the companies that took it and then went bankrupt.
And all the people that got rich that were connected to Barack Obama in the process.
A bunch of the Solyndra, a bunch of the solar power companies, they got the money and they ran.
I have no doubt there's going to be a lot of that here too. Yeah. No doubt. Sadly, by the way. Garrick.
Oh, well, this is just an example of the rich getting richer. I mean, I'll never have the privilege of attending a Harvard class, and most people in America never will. And it's just a shame that, this is what your tax-paying dollars go to.
Well, could you have gotten into Harvard? I'm just wondering.
God, no.
I had to do that. I had to put in that knife.
No. Could you?
No, absolutely not. So my last name isn't Gore or Biden or,
My dad was a plumber and my mom was a lunch lady for a while, right. So I don't really.
That's awesome.
I never looked for economic intercourse with Harvard.
And that's the last comment from Mark and the Millennials. Well done, well played. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross, and of course, Warren Miller, and our producer, Adam Couture, our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.